Naomi Ward stepped down from the stagecoach with one small carpetbag, one faded blue dress, and one trembling hope left in her heart. Pine ash stood before her in the mountain dust, all wooden porches, staring faces and curtains shifting in windows. She had crossed half the country to marry Ambrose Pike, the storekeeper who kept winter credit for half the town, and had written that he wanted a quiet, hard-working wife. That was not the sort of arrival a person forgot. Not when a young woman stepped down expecting a husband and found a whole street waiting to judge her. I'm Mabel Beecham, though most folks around these parts simply call me Mr. B. And I can tell you this much. Hope had walked every mile with Naomi Ward that day, right up until Ambrose Pike looked at her like she had brought shame in her hands. But Ambrose did not smile when she gave her name. Naomi reached into her carpetbag and pulled out his letters, proof that he had sent for her. Her hands shook as she unfolded them. Then an old work record tucked between the pages slipped loose and fell into the dust. Ambrose picked it up before she could reach it. His eyes caught the printed heading, and his face changed. "A debtor's laundry?" he said, loud enough for the whole street to hear. "You scrubbed sheets to pay off a man's debts?" Naomi's cheeks burned. "After my father died, I worked to pay what he owed. It was honest labor." Ambrose looked at the watching town, then back at her as if she had carried shame into his doorway. "I will not marry a woman with that kind of past." The word struck harder than a slap. Whispers rose around her. Naomi gripped the letters in one hand and her carpetbag in the other. She had no husband now, no fare back east, and no friend in Pine Ash willing to step toward her. Then a woman near the mercantile steps said, "Send her to the poorhouse before dark. That's where women with no money and no kin belong." Naomi lowered her eyes to the dust, and for one terrible moment, it seemed the whole town agreed. A man's voice came from the mercantile porch, quiet at first, but sharp enough to cut through the whispers. "Then shame on Pine Ash," he said. "If a woman can cross half the country and find no mercy waiting." Sawyer Boone stood in the shade with a coil of rope over one shoulder and sawdust on his coat. Most folks in Pine Ash knew his name, though few had ever been welcome past his gate. He was the widowed trapper from beyond the timber ridge, a man who built cabins, set snares, and came to town only when his flour barrel ran low. Some said he had turned hard after his wife died one winter, when Pine Ash sent more gossip than help to his door. Ambrose Pike turned on him. "This is none of your concern, Boone." Sawyer stepped down from the porch into the dust. "It became my concern when you left a woman stranded with no fare, no kin, and no shelter." A few women lowered their eyes. Others stared harder as if waiting to see whether decency would dare stand alone. Naomi clutched her carpetbag with both hands, afraid to breathe. Sawyer looked at her, not with pity, but with plain respect. "There's an empty bed in my cabin," he said. "She can take it tonight." Ambrose's mouth tightened. "And what will people think?" Sawyer glanced once at the watching town, then back at Naomi. "I don't answer to this town." Naomi followed Sawyer Boone up the narrow trail as evening turned the pines blue. She kept 3 careful steps behind him, one hand wrapped tight around her carpetbag. Kindness from strangers had always frightened her. Too often, kindness came with a price named later. Sawyer did not reach for her bag. He did not crowd her. He only slowed his pace when the trail grew steep and waited until she caught up. His cabin stood beyond the timber ridge, square and sturdy, with a stone chimney, a clean-swept porch, and a woodpile stacked neat against the wall. Inside, the air smelled of smoke, cedar, and plain soap. Sawyer opened a small back room and set the lamp on a wooden table by the bed. "This room is yours," he said. "Door locks from the inside." Naomi stared at the clean quilt, the wash basin, and the folded towel. Her throat ached. "What do I owe you?" Sawyer looked almost hurt by the question. Then, only tired. "Nothing but honesty while you decide what comes next." No one had asked her to perform gratitude. No one had told her to defend every hard year behind her. No one had measured her worth against a rumor. Since arriving in Pine Ash, Naomi finally set her carpetbag beside the bed and felt her breath come easy. At dawn, Naomi learned Sawyer Boone was not alone. A boy sat at the small table near the stove, thin-shouldered and sharp-eyed, with a carved wooden cane resting beside his chair. He watched Naomi as if he expected her first words to hurt. "This is Ben," Sawyer said, "my sister's boy. He has had more pity than kindness these past years." Ben lifted his chin. "I don't need nursing." Naomi hung her shawl on a peg by the door. Then she looked at the unwashed pans by the basin, the cold biscuits on the table, and the dusty quilts folded in the corner. "Good," she said gently, "because I need help." That stopped him. By noon, Ben was sorting beans into a tin bowl while Naomi scrubbed the kettle. By evening, he was reading labels from Sawyer's winter stores while she stacked flour, salt, and dried apples where everyone could reach them. Sawyer watched from the open doorway with wood shavings on his sleeves and grief quiet in his eyes. The cabin had been strong before Naomi came, but strength was not the same as warmth. There were traps on the wall, tools by the hearth, and wood enough for winter. Yet the place felt like it had gone too long without laughter. That night, Naomi cooked stew thick enough to quiet every hungry stomach. Ben took one bite and muttered, "Needs pepper." Naomi smiled. Sawyer did too, though he turned toward the stove before anyone could see. 3 mornings later, Naomi went looking for kindling beyond Sawyer's cabin fence. The air was so dry it stung Naomi's throat. Under the pines, dead branches covered the ground, and the old cleared fire line above town was choked with brush. It had once been cut bare to stop flames from reaching pine ash, but now it looked useless. Below the ridge, a narrow wooden water trough carried pine ash's drinking water toward town. Naomi stopped with an armful of sticks pressed against her apron. "That ridge could burn fast," she said when Sawyer walked up from the woodpile behind her. Sawyer followed her gaze. "It could." "Then why has no one cleared the brush?" His jaw tightened. "Because clearing brush costs money. Ambrose and the store committee said the town could wait until spring." Naomi looked down toward the roofs of pine ash, sitting small and proud beneath the dry trees. She had seen men like that before. Men who guarded appearances, counted coins, and ignored danger until poorer folks paid the price. Sawyer nodded toward the open meadow between his cabin and the trees. "That's why I keep this grass cut short every summer. Fire runs hungry when folks pretend it won't come." A wind moved through the ridge, rattling the deadfall. Naomi held the kindling tighter, and she did not forget what she had seen. The fever came to pine ash with the rain. First one child took sick, then 3 more. By the second night, mothers were carrying weak, burning children into the church hall, begging for help. But the only doctor close enough to serve pine ash was stranded beyond the washed-out mountain road, and the midwife had been called to a ranch 2 valleys away. Naomi knew that kind of sickness before anyone named it. She had seen it in the debtor's laundry, where bad water and dirty bedding could carry death from one cot to the next. "Boil every drop of drinking water," she told the minister's wife. "Wash the blankets in vinegar. Burn the soiled rags. Keep the children warm, but do not bury them under quilts." A man near the door muttered, "Are we taking orders from her now?" Naomi heard him. So did every mother in the room. Then Ambrose Pike's little niece began shaking so hard her teeth clicked. Naomi crossed the church hall, knelt beside the child, and laid a cool, wet cloth on her forehead. "Bring me clean water," Naomi said, "and broth, if there is any." No one argued then. Through the long, dark hours, Naomi changed the girl's bedding, cooled her face, and spooned broth between her lips a little at a time. By morning, the child's breathing eased. Across pine ash, children who had followed Naomi's care began opening their eyes. And the town that had shamed her found itself whispering her name for a different reason. Gratitude in pine ash did not last long once Ambrose Pike felt it turning against him. By the next Sunday, mothers who once avoided Naomi were sending for her. Men tipped their hats when she passed through town. Even the minister's wife left a basket of eggs on Sawyer's porch, then hurried away without knocking. Ambrose watched it all from behind his store window, his pride souring like milk in summer heat. "She knows what she's doing," he told the church relief committee in the back room of the Mercantile. "First she takes Boone's spare bed, Now she makes herself necessary to every household in town. The poorhouse trustee sat beside the stove and nodded, as if mercy had become a crime. Ambrose tapped the winter credit ledger on his desk. An unmarried woman living under a widower's roof is not charity, it is scandal, and scandal has consequences. One of the mothers carried the warning to Sawyer's cabin before sundown. Naomi stood beside the kitchen table, one hand pressed to the chair back. The cabin that had felt safe that morning suddenly felt borrowed again. Sawyer's face hardened. They don't get to decide what my roof means. But Naomi knew how quickly a town could turn shelter into shame, especially when the man holding the ledger wanted her gone. Over the next several days, after Ambrose stirred suspicion against her, Sawyer walked with Naomi whenever she went into town. He did not speak much. He carried baskets of broth and clean linen, waited outside each sick room, and walked her home before dusk when the trail began to darken. It was not possession. It was protection, quiet as a shadow and steady as stone. During those supply rounds, Sawyer showed her the creek path behind the schoolhouse, the one children used when spring mud swallowed the main road. Back at the cabin, small things began to change. Coffee waited before dawn. Bread cooled by the stove. Sawyer carved Ben a stronger cane after Naomi mentioned the old one bent too easily. Naomi stitched Sawyer's torn sleeve while he read aloud from an old newspaper, his rough voice stumbling over city names until Ben laughed without bitterness. One night, after Naomi returned from tending another fevered child, she sat by the fire with her hands trembling from weariness. Sawyer noticed. You don't have to earn your place every hour. Naomi looked down at her tired hands. That is the only way anyone ever let me stay. The room went still. Sawyer set another log in the stove. This cabin was colder before you came, he said softly. Even when the fire was full, Naomi turned toward him, and for once the silence did not frighten her. The church supper was meant to raise money for winter relief, but Ambrose Pike turned it into a trial. While women set pies on the long tables and children sat along the benches with tin plates in their laps, Ambrose stood near the pulpit and lifted his voice. This town cannot call itself decent while an unmarried woman sleeps under a widower's roof, he said. Either Naomi Ward leaves that cabin, or she marries Boone at once to repair appearances. Near the front bench, the poorhouse trustee folded his hands and waited, as if Naomi's future had already been decided. Every face turned toward Naomi. She stood near the back table with a basket of clean napkins in her hands. For a moment, the old shame rose in her throat. She almost lowered her eyes. She almost let silence swallow her again. Then Sawyer stepped from the wall and stood beside her. Naomi set the basket down, looked at him once, then faced the town. I will not be married as punishment for needing shelter, she said, her voice shaking but clear, and I will not be shamed for surviving poverty with honest work. Ambrose scoffed. Fine words from a laundrywoman. A chair scraped near the stove. Ben pushed himself upright, gripped his new cane, and limped forward into the open aisle. She never treated me like I was broken, he said. She gave me work. She gave me worth. The room fell silent. Sawyer's voice came low and firm. Mercy is not scandal. And if this town has forgotten that, then shame on all of you. The answer came that very night. Long after the church supper ended, lightning split the sky above Pine Ash. Thunder rolled down the mountain, and a hard white flash struck the dry timber ridge where the deadfall lay thick. By the time the church bell began ringing, flames were already crawling through the brush above town. Men ran for buckets, axes, and shovels. Sawyer grabbed a shovel from the church steps and rushed toward the ridge with the other men. Ben started after him, limping hard with his cane. Sawyer turned back. No, Ben. Go to the Meadow gate. Take a lantern. Guide folks to the cabin if smoke comes down. Ben's face tightened, but he nodded and made his way as fast as his bad leg allowed toward the road to Sawyer's cabin. Naomi followed the crowd only as far as the edge of the street. From there, she saw sparks jumping toward the wooden water flume below the ridge. The fire break, someone cried. It never got cleared. Smoke rolled downhill, black and choking. Near the schoolhouse, children and older folks stumbled in confusion, caught between the rising smoke and the panicked street. Mothers screamed names into the dark. Ambrose Pike stood outside his store, clutching the winter credit ledgers against his chest. "Move my goods first," he shouted. "If the store burns, the town starves." But no one knew where to run, and the flames were moving faster than fear could think. Then Naomi saw the creek path behind the schoolyard, the one Sawyer had shown her on their supply rounds. And she knew exactly what had to be done. Naomi ran toward the schoolhouse where the smoke was thickest. "Quilts," she shouted. "Soak every quilt you can find. Hold them over the children against the smoke. Bring the laundry carts from behind the church. Children first, then the older folks." For one breath, no one moved. Then the minister's wife grabbed a bucket and ran for the water trough. Another woman pulled a quilt from the schoolhouse cot. Two older men hauled the wooden laundry carts from behind the church. Naomi wrapped a wet cloth over one little boy's mouth and pointed toward the dark path behind the schoolyard. "There's a creek path," she said. "Stay low. Hold hands. Do not let go." Smoke burned her eyes until tears streamed down her face, but she kept counting heads. She lifted smaller children into the carts, helped a grandmother over a fallen branch, and sent the strongest boys ahead with lanterns held low. Behind them, Sawyer's voice rang from the ridge as he and the men cut a desperate fire line, trying to keep the flames from dropping into town. At the meadow gate, Ben stood with his lantern raised high, his new cane braced under one arm. "This way," he cried. "To the cabin." The cleared meadow slowed the smoke and kept the worst sparks from reaching the cabin. One by one, Naomi led the children and older folks across it and inside. All night, 2 battles were fought. On the ridge, Sawyer and the men beat back the fire with shovels, axes, and wet sacks. Inside the cabin, Naomi fought fear, burns, and choking smoke with clean water, salve, and steady hands. She washed soot from children's faces, laid burn salve on blistered hands, and held shaking mothers until they could breathe again. By dawn, the ridge still smoked, but the children were alive. The older folks were alive, and Pine Ash had survived because Sawyer held the fire back, Ben showed the way, and the woman it called shameful knew how to save people when pride could not. As smoke still curled above Pine Ash, Ambrose Pike tried to stand before the blackened street and speak like a man who had led the town through danger. But voices rose before his could settle. "Naomi led us through the smoke," one mother said. "Boone held the ridgeline," said another man. "And Ben held the lantern at the meadow gate," the minister's wife added, her eyes wet with shame. Then she turned to Naomi. "You saved my grandson during the fever, and I repaid you with whispers. Forgive me." Ambrose's little niece clung to Naomi's skirt, and the poorhouse trustee quietly stepped back into the crowd. Sawyer looked over the faces that had once judged her. "Naomi Ward owes this town nothing," he said. "Not an apology, not a marriage, not one more explanation for surviving what would have broken weaker hearts." The shame that had followed Naomi into Pine Ash finally moved where it belonged. But shame does not leave a wounded heart all at once. That evening, Naomi packed her carpetbag anyway. She stood at the cabin door with the bag in one hand and her shawl over her arm, looking back at the room that had become the first safe place she had known in years. Sawyer came in from the porch and stopped a few steps away, giving her room to choose. "Leaving?" Naomi swallowed. "I thought your name might rest easier without mine beside it." He shook his head. "That spare bed was never a bargain. But this home changed when you walked into it." His voice softened. "Marry me only if you want the cabin, the winters, Ben, the work, and me. Not because they demand it, because I love you." Naomi's eyes filled. "Ben gets a say," she whispered. From beside the stove, Ben gripped his new cane and said, "I already said yes." Naomi laughed through her tears. Sawyer stepped closer, slow enough for her to refuse. But Naomi stepped to him first and kissed him, soft and sure, while Ben covered his eyes and grinned. They married beside the rebuilt Flume, in the meadow that had sheltered Pine Ash. Naomi did not marry to erase shame. She married because she had found a home where love did not ask her to apologize for surviving. Years later, when a frightened widow came to their door after being turned away from a wagon train, Naomi opened it wide. "There's a clean bed by the stove," she said. And Mercy became the Boone family name. Thank you for watching the story all the way to the end. If you enjoyed it, please like and share, it really helps us. And subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Before you go, rate this story 0 to 10 in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I'll see you in the next tale.